He must have thought that there was a chance, at least at the beginning of things. Maybe for him, hope lasted for months, and maybe it was even for years. But by the 38th year of waiting by the side of that healing pool, with each new day sitting there alone and unnoticed, and each time that someone stepped over him so that they could get into those healing waters, and every time that someone else left healed, after all that, his outlook deteriorated. By the time Jesus shows up to meet the man, he's so downtrodden that when Jesus asks him, "Do you want to be made well?" he can only come up with reasons why his situation cannot change. He lost the hope of being made well long ago. But fortunately for that man, and for those of us who still have the opportunity to hear this beautiful story, Jesus is not deterred by this man's hopelessness. In fact, Jesus doesn't even entertain his despondency, but instead, he tells the man what to do. Get up, roll up your mat, and walk. And at once, John says, yes, in just a brief moment, that man stood up, was made well, took his mat, and began to walk. Now, this is a beautiful story for us in our gospel. And it might even stretch our sense of what is possible in the world. And also, even the mention of healing might make any one of us uncomfortable. If you've ever read any of the healing stories in the Gospels, and there are several, and you've thought, that's not how things actually work in the world, you wouldn't be alone. Our modern sensibilities and medical advancements have moved us far from the ideas of many of these ancient original hearers. And then when we start talking about things like healing, it's hard to do so, at least it's hard for me to do so, without thinking about the faith healers on TV with their flashy suits and wild hairdos and wild antics and requests for offering plates so full that it can buy them a new airplane. But probably the moment that it's hardest to think about healing is in the wake of times that we've prayed for someone we love to be healed, and they weren't. As you might know about me, I grew up and was profoundly shaped by a Pentecostal upbringing. I don't know what you know about Pentecostals and charismatics, but they earnestly believe and diligently seek healing, not just as something that was cool in scriptures, but as a present experience that we should still know in this life. And don't get me wrong, I'm shaped by that, and I believe that God can, and at times God still does physically heal people. But over the years, I've often thought there has to be something more to the healings in the Gospels and to what Jesus was offering when he healed someone. When he said things like, "Take up your mat and walk," there's something, I believe there's something more going on there than just someone who couldn't walk now can. So, over the course of these next 4 weeks, we're going to hear 4 different healing stories from the Gospels. And we're going to listen in for that something more in each of them. And in the midst of that, I hope that we can see when Jesus healed someone in the Gospels, he offered them the kinds of things that matter for those of us living in a modern world that so often threatens our mental health and wellness. Let's think back to the man who was immobile in the story from John 5. He'd been at the side of that pool for 38 long, quiet years. His ailment was in his body, yes, but what he said about his situation reveals an even deeper need for healing. When Jesus asked him, "Do you want to be made well?" he said, "I have no one to put me into the pool. I have no one." This man was isolated and alone. And now our modern problems don't seem so far removed from that ancient one, do they? For all our research, all of our advancements, as much as our modern medicine has brought cures for many things that ancient people could only pray they might be healed of, we've yet to cure isolation and the loneliness that it brings. In fact, loneliness is an ailment that has only become worse as we've become more advanced. In 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General called loneliness an epidemic. The World Health Organization declared loneliness a global health threat. And it doesn't only threaten certain age groups, but people of all ages are prone to be adversely impacted by loneliness. Loneliness is a health crisis with major risks, including depression, anxiety, and leading to other disorders. And while any one of us can have a moment or a situation where we are left feeling alone, when it becomes chronic, loneliness threatens mental health in an ever-increasing vicious cycle. As one becomes more isolated, mental health can worsen. And as mental health worsens, it can lead to even deeper levels of isolated existence. We need to tend in various ways to the times that we or others, like the man at the pool, could say, "I have no one." And that includes seeking professional help. Now, I think we've moved on in some ways from stigmas of seeking professional mental health care, but I don't know that we've made it all the way to where we should be. You may or may not know that I regularly see a therapist myself. I have at times in the past, but I have intentionally and especially the last 2.5 years. I'll let you do the math of what happened 2.5 years ago. I knew that when I stepped into this role of being the lead pastor here, that if I was going to survive, I would need to take my mental health very seriously. I also know that I'm someone who, in times of decreasing mental health, can isolate myself pretty easily. We need to take care of ourselves and seek help when we need it, and there ain't a bit of shame in any of that. But that's next week's sermon. But even for some, finding suitable therapeutic support can be awfully challenging. I hope you had a chance to see it if you read the Gazette, but there was an important article in the December 28th issue of our local newspaper. Featured a few friends of mine, Tamara Marcus, Reverend Dr. Ray Coleman, who's the pastor at Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church, who's also hosting the events tomorrow that I encourage you to go to. And it featured Ann Harris Carter as well, who will present an award here this evening at our potluck. But the article I mentioned was on the topic of the importance and the challenge of finding culturally informed care in our county. Linn County. The three leaders in our community noted the challenges that Black people living in Linn County can have when they seek to find mental health professionals who have a shared lived experience. Ann Harris Carter, in her public health role, is thankfully doing some really good work that's featured in that article as well, to create spaces where people of color can find culturally informed mental health care in our county. But as important as seeking professional help is, and creating the kind of spaces that provide suitable care for us, mental health is not only the result of things that professionals make happen. As important as that is, it's not only about seeking professionals. We can also create the conditions where healing can happen. And I think we find our guidance in Jesus' response to the man who is by the pool. In our story, Jesus noticed the man. Now, I don't know what he saw, but Jesus evidently moved slowly enough past that pool and the people in those porticos that he saw something that made him realize that this man had been there for some time. And after Jesus noticed him, he did not pass him by like so many others had passed him by in the past, especially those who passed him or stepped over him on their way to their own healing in that pool. But Jesus was different. He took the time and he spoke to him. And even when the man was beaten down and beleaguered, Jesus didn't give up on him. Instead, he showed compassion and care. It's probably no secret that in church we don't always get it right. I know I don't always. In fact, I've spent some time this week trying to repair a few relationships of people that I've ignored and should not have. But I want to say this. At the heart of it, the church, in God's wisdom, is designed and organized so that no one should ever have to say, I have no one. In God's wisdom, we have been put together to celebrate the joys of life. We come together for weddings and baptisms and confirmations and on and on and on, because no one should have to celebrate alone. Yeah, I'm coming to your wedding, Aaron, later this year. I see you smiling over there. And we are put together to be there through the hardest times of life too. Through the times of deaths, divorce, and diagnoses that we feared happening. Because no one should have to face any of that alone either. And of course, we don't just wait for the highest of highs and the lowest of lows. We gather for all of the glorious, mundane between moments too. I feel like this is a good place to stop and remind you, we have a potluck tonight, and I sure hope you'll be there. But through it all, let's remember who we are. Let's lean in and realize the healing power of paying attention to one another, of being community to each other. We need places of healing to both earnestly ask God to restore what ails the body, but also to find a kind of healing from loneliness that community makes possible. Now, I'm happy to say that this coming Sunday, next Sunday, the 25th, in this service, we're going to do something a little bit different. Pastor Tara, our Minister of Congregational Care, has been coordinating, and she will be leading us in a time of healing prayer in the midst of this service. So I want to prepare you, because right after the sermon next Sunday, elders in our church will have stations throughout the sanctuary. And we're going to invite those who want to come to be anointed with oil, to come and to be anointed and to receive prayer. I'm glad we're doing that. I'm really glad we're doing that. I believe that in moments of prayer like that, in places of connection, where we both will encounter the grace of God and the care and love of another, I have to believe that our sense of healing is going to be expanded. But for now, I want to go back to John's story. After Jesus spoke to the man who had been hopeless, only a moment earlier, that man responded. He stood up, rolled up his mat, and walked away for the first time in nearly 4 decades. And the first people that he encountered after meeting Jesus were religious leaders who nearly left him as isolated as he had been by the side of that pool. You see, they didn't like the fact that he was carrying his mat on the Sabbath. He was doing work, even though Jesus had instructed him to do that very thing. And I don't know for sure. Our Gospels don't give us the details to psychologize much of what the characters were feeling. But if I, for a moment, put myself in that man's shoes, I bet when I walked away from Jesus, I would have had a bounce in my step. But by the time that I ran into these people who scowled and said, "You shouldn't even be doing what you're doing," I could imagine my disposition falling. But nonetheless, as the man walked on, and as he went to the temple, Jesus sought him out once more, creating not only the moment of healing that he experienced, but creating another moment of connection with him. And in this, community was overcoming isolation. I hope you'll hear from your Lord today. I hope that we will commit to follow in the steps of Jesus, to notice, to show compassion and care for one another, and to be a community for all who would otherwise be isolated. May it be so. Amen.